I bought an OLED TV and I realized how amazing HDR was in games. My actual developer interest started there. My secret intent is to make it more popular.
I'd like to speak about the native HDR mod for Starfield.
The game came out and people were like, oh my god, this game is like the opposite of HDR. We are hooking into the game, rendering code and replacing how that works with our own version. If developers don't put a little bit of effort into supporting these things now, then in 10 years, it's gonna be a struggle to play these games. Games should focus more on being future-proof. What looked good in SDR is not what looks good in HDR. It's another natural evolution of image quality.
What exactly is HDR and SDR?
The way I usually explain it is that that's how
Don't
it
let
went.
your parents listen to this. AAA games take big budgets to make, and most of the time, big teams. And today, I had the opportunity to speak to one of the people within the industry, Filippo Tarpini. He works at Remedy, and he is probably one of the masters of all things HDR, SDR, and Gamma. Now, if you don't know exactly what we're talking about, this podcast is for you because we are going to open up and talk all things SDR and HDR within this episode and much, much more. We talk about his early inspirations, what led him to pursue his career in the AAA industry, his passion for video games. He shares his personal story of joining Remedy and then taking on a personal project to improve HDR or add HDR onto a certain game that we're going to get into. We also get to talk about Starfield and how he's working on an HDR mod for that and how you can get your hands on that as well. And it has been a while since I uploaded. I'm in the middle of relocating right now. And as you can see here, this is not my new set. I'm actually renting it out currently for this specific episode. And it does look amazing and I hope you enjoy it. Anyways, with all that said, let's uncover Filippo's story. Filippo, welcome to the show. Thank you so very much for being a guest. It is an honor. As is tradition on the show, I try to talk to my guests about their early life at the beginning and kind of what got them into their career and their passions today. And we're not going to change the direction here. So my first question would be, how did you really start coding or programming? And how did that passion steer you towards working in the AAA gaming studio that you're working in today and just in the AAA gaming industry in general? What's the whole story there and how did it all begin?
Hey, so there's a lot to answer here.
Unpack.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. I think I've been thinking about it, and I think my passion for games, I mean, in general, of course, I like games as many other kids of my age did, but I remember two specific episodes that really brought it to light and made it like a big thing for me. I remember like being at a friend's house and playing GTA 3 for the first time, like, and I never heard of it before. And I just remember grabbing the controller and having a free roaming world. And I don't think I even had PS2 or PS1 back then or something. I don't know. But I had never tried anything like that. And even if I was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, not sure. But that was one of the most defining moments of my life. I remember like the emotion of like being free in a video game and doing whatever you want, and that probably just messed up with my brain and led me where I am. And then another major thing, which was a bit later on, and that really sparked my interest was the Ratchet and Clank games on PS2. Some of them had what is called the Insomniac Museum, and basically at the end of the game you could enter like a special room that would show you how they developed stuff. It wasn't like a making of, it was more like a compilation of bugs and alternative versions of what they had in the game. Like, we tried this boss and we tried this attack, but it failed because it wasn't fun for the player. And they explained all that stuff. And, as a kid, you have no idea you don't really think about that stuff. And that gave me the first perspective of everything that was behind it. And since then, I guess I've been looking at games a little bit differently and trying to see what's behind when I play. And so I think it started pretty early for me,
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
this this direction. And I feel very lucky that I managed to get a job into games. It was never I was never certain I could get it. Like, I remember being very anxious in my studies, and like, am I gonna manage to like fulfill my dream of making games? But in the end, it worked out. And
Absolutely.
regarding AAA, I'm not like specifically passionate about AAA. I like other games as well, but um, I've generally been driven by projects. So, like, I've been picking my jobs, and when I go somewhere, I kind of ask like what I would be working on, and if that sounds cool, then I go there. And of course, in the case of Remedy, they had such a good track record that it was hard to say no.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with Remedy's track record for sure, it's definitely one of the probably Hall of Famers when it comes to AAA games. I remember back in the day, when Max Payne came out, those were the good days. You were talking about GTA 3, and you just put like a memory in my head of exactly the same thing as you're saying. When I was a kid as well, I just kind of literally what I was doing, I was just free roaming around the city, not even paying attention to the missions and everything, and I was just enjoying my time. But what's interesting about what you're saying is that you managed to kind of mold that story into a career. And my kind of follow-up question to that would be, how did your parents react to all of this? Were they supportive in your decision to kind of take a role or a career in video game development?
Well, I remember a lot of days where my PlayStation 2 was locked away.
Okay.
Um,
Yep.
but I would,
Been there.
my parents wouldn't be home in the afternoon, so I would like scout the house for the controllers and play a little bit anyway, and then put them back so they wouldn't know. That's that's how
Don't
it
let your
went.
parents listen to this.
I mean, it was mostly when I didn't get good grades or when I was playing too much, I think. Now I don't remember. But of course I was addicted to games,
Right, right.
like as many other kids, even these days with like Fortnite and stuff. Um, I'm not sure how much was I was playing, but I really enjoyed it, like exploring all the random PS2 games. I remember just entering the shop and renting them. We would go to like Blockbuster and stuff. Just it's weird because yeah, when you're a kid, you have no idea what actually is a good game or not, and you might fall in love with games that are like considered average by the critics and stuff, but you have the
Absolutely, yeah.
best memories with them.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I think they were supportive. Like, it it's not like I said, okay, I'm gonna make games, please support me. It was more of a, like, open thing. It
Great.
shaped into that slowly, but
Great.
they've never been like this, like, you should get into building boats because that's where the money is, like, or tasting wine.
That's not bad. That's not bad.
So they were pretty supportive and helped with my studies. So yeah, that definitely helped, and I'm grateful for that.
That's really wonderful. I like to hear stories where parents support their children in doing something that probably the parents had no idea about, but they kind of let you, let's say, quote unquote, risk it. And that's wonderful. That's really, really
Yeah,
great.
you know what? They kind of believed in me. because they saw I couldn't like be forced to do what I don't like. I'm just very
Yeah.
bad at doing things I don't like. So they probably understood that.
Really?
Yeah, they saw my like very specific passion and just understood that I was best doing whatever I wanted than being forced into anything else.
Well, hey, I think they were correct in doing so for sure. Um, that kind of leads me to my next question, where I would like to speak about any mentors that you have had along the way, or any individuals who played a significant role in shaping your career. If you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think one's first job is like pretty influential, like your first kiss
Yeah,
or something like that. Um,
for sure.
and I was working in Italy as my first job, and I met some very very good people, like a relatively small studio that was self-made, kind of like a startup, but they had been operating for a bit, and they had like I don't know 5 or 6 employees, so it was like 10 people, 12 people in the studio, pretty small, but they were all super passionate and also skilled. They were some of the most skilled devs I have yet met. But specifically, there was one one guy called Tommaso that I kind of became friends with, and back then we were working on a VR game for PSVR. It was a launch title for PS4,
Oh wow.
PSVR, and I was doing like level scripts and pretty simple stuff. It was my first gig. He was doing more of the complex behind of the systems behind. We constantly discuss stuff. Yeah, something that really influenced me, I think, is how much we were discussing in that studio, how much everything was open. Of course, it was more of an indie studio in a way. We were just discussing everything all day long, like anything, the music, the graphics, the gameplay, the story. Anybody would say their piece on anything, and everybody would be open. Of course, like the writer would ultimately write the story, but there was so much back and forth between everybody, and it really helped. And also, it fully immersed myself. But yeah, specifically, I had Tommaso, which I would pester with technical questions, and I quickly realized that we were pretty similar in our technical mindset of like he taught me to really research anything you're doing before doing it and kind of doing things properly, let's say. Like instead of just jumping in and like we were using Unreal Engine, so instead of just jumping in and trying to do something, check if Unreal already has like some code to do that, and if not, it might have some code to help with that, and so you can always reuse what's there, so it's safer, and you need to write less stuff. And not everybody has that attitude, but um, so yeah, he was like a massive mentor and still is to this day.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you know what he's up to today.
Yeah, I mean, we worked at the same place in Italy for uh, 2 years. Then he stayed there, and I moved to Firesprite in Liverpool, and then he came there as well after like a year or so. Uh, I brought him there. I mean, I brought him there. I mean, I referred him,
Yeah, yeah.
and he's still there.
Oh, cool.
In
Wow.
a good position. I tried to also ask him to join me at Remedy, but it didn't work out the second time.
Uh,
But we're still in contact. I think this was an extremely lucky thing to get from me. Like not everybody has the luck to have such a good mentor. I don't even know. I haven't told him he was like my mentor. Maybe he hasn't even realized. But um,
He'll know now.
but I've been kind of trying to act the same towards like people that are just starting now that I have a little bit more experience. If if they are the kind of people to search for help. I've been influenced so much by this experience that I kind of want to replicate it into others, you know, like I'm like it helped me so much to have somebody explain me things, so I want to do the same for others. But yeah,
That's quite a big deal. That's quite a big deal. I think Tomas is going to be quite happy to hear that because, as you said, it's two things in one, right? Not only did he teach you, but he kind of changed your attitude where you want to be kind of the same, and I wouldn't say kind of leave your knowledge to others, but help others, as you said, and that's I think that makes your soul feel good. Like if I'm correct, right? When
yeah,
when moments like this occur, and
yeah,
but I think moments like this really kind of make you warm and happy on the inside. Like nothing. It's really unique to everyone in particular, I think. But here, in your example, it's with kind of teaching and talking about video games. Have you had moments where you acted as a mentor for somebody, at least in the slightest?
sure, yeah. Specifically here, like it happened to me that we had employees that, for example, never use Unreal Engine, and like I used it for many years, so it's always a pleasure to give them an insider's point of view when they first join, and quickly uh, wrap them around the main concepts that you wouldn't really find online easily, I think.
That's really wonderful. It's a great kind of, let's say, origin origin story of
Villain story,
oh
yeah.
yeah, we're gonna change that into a villain story for sure. I finally want to address the elephant in the room, which is HDR, SDR, and the mods. You are quite the master when it comes to all those things. I am not even a novice. I am absolutely a newbie. So I might ask you a lot of questions just to be on the same page as you. But nonetheless, could we start off with something quite simple? And to begin with the topic of HDR and SDR in the simplest way possible, could you please explain these terms and what exactly is HDR and SDR?
Yeah, HDR is a pretty confusing thing, and it was to me, even if I look back like a year and a half ago, I mean, maybe a bit more, but I was like, I remember myself Googling, what is HDR? HDR explain like M5, because it's such an abstract thing and also sounds like a buzzword because, you know, like TVs like to have all these terms, fluid motion, interpolation, which ultimately sometimes they don't mean anything. Um, but HDR is actually a great thing, so it's a real thing. The way I usually explain it to people that are not experienced about it is that HDR is mainly three things. It's more brightness, more colors, like a wider range of colors, and more shades within these colors. Uh, so basically, HDR stands for high dynamic range, and SDR stands for standard dynamic range. And SDR is what's been going on forever until recent. Like all previous screens or monitors, you call them SDR. You would call them SDR. It's not something specific. It's just like we defined SDR now because we have HDR.
So it was like literally the norm. Nobody really cared. It was the
Yeah,
way it was.
I think
Okay.
all kind of still is for
Okay.
monitors, but yeah, this new technology basically it's like an overdrive, no, override, over like boost. Like this is the standard range, and you have colors within this. HDR allows you to go beyond. It's kind of there is a peak, there is a limit, but it's so high that you will never notice it. So basically, it's unlimited, and that's like if you look at the sun, let's say in an older SDR game, it's never gonna get that bright because TVs wouldn't get that bright, and the signal to encode the image wouldn't allow the sun to be like much brighter than a lamp in a room. Um, but with HDR, like TVs can get way bright. I mean, they don't get as bright as the sun. That would not be nice, but
That would not be good.
they they're usually measured in lumen and nits. Like the most modern ones can get, I think, 1,500 nits, 2,000 nits, and that's like a relevant amount of brightness. And when you see a light shining through in an HDR video game, it's more kind of, watching a window to that place.
Understood. So it will make you want to squint if you're watching directly into the sunlight a little bit.
That can happen, but generally, I think games try to avoid that.
Ah,
They
okay.
don't want you to do that. Like in a game, you can't really close your eyes, So if, like, let's say a first-person shooter, if the field of view always includes the sun on the top right, you don't
Hmm.
want that to blind you, of
Yeah,
course. So you would
understood.
dim it down. Also, they have some kind of eye adaptation thing. So if if there's too much brightness, the average in the image, the average brightness goes down, so it's more balanced. But to go back to exactly what it is, yeah, I talked about the brightness, but it doesn't really end there, because there is a range of colors that TVs and color standards can reproduce. RGB, red, green, blue. This is not something that is usually like discussed, even like in high school. Probably many people studied like with paint or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
The primary colors.
yeah, what was visible on older SDR monitors and TVs was a limited range of possible color combinations, and the human eye can see, I don't know, like a range that is about as double, if not more of that. And the real world has a lot more colors than that as well. Like there is some shades of purple, red, green, blue that were not possible to come through a monitor
Oh,
or a
interesting. Okay.
display.
Hmm.
And so HDR extends this range. So a red can be, let's say, more red. It's gonna be more saturated if the developers want, and if they write that color in the material. Now, of course, there is another side of this, like whether a display is able to show that color, because then every monitor is different, and it,
Right.
it
Yeah.
might take a red, like the game says, okay, this red needs to be saturated to this amount, etc. But the monitor is not capable of displaying that color, so it just dims it down or makes it a little bit more green or something. So there is all of that as well, but that's beyond. Um,
Control, I guess. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, a quick question. Is it only affected for OLED TVs or IPS panels also it works on that as well, correct?
It's available on older types of panels like IPS as well. I think my monitor is not OLED. Yeah, it's not exclusive to OLED. OLED has the
Okay.
advantage that it has deep blacks, which is something else I
Yeah.
haven't talked about, but that's also possible in SDR, like deep blacks that have no brightness at all. And of course, yes, the contrast, the dynamic range is what makes an image pop. Um, so yeah, OLED of course is the best technology at the moment.
Okay, so HDR basically opens up the full, let's say, gamma, right, of all the lights that the creators of a game would like to intend to showcase to the player. They can actually have the freedom now to give the full color gamma or color ratio, whatever the right term is,
Yeah,
to the player if they have HDR capabilities on their TV, on their monitor.
yeah, yeah,
So essentially, it makes the image better, crisper, like HD when it came out, like HDMI when it came out back in the early 2000s. This is an improved version of the HDMI image that you're seeing with better colors and better
yeah.
everything, more or less. No?
It's another natural evolution of image quality in a way. Like with HDR, you have more crispness and like more detail, and with HDR, you have more contrast and highlights and more colors. To be honest, um, the additional colors that are possible through HDR, they are still not that commonly used, because it's kind of very hard for developers to shift to them, because like developers have older screens and you are using textures from older games that didn't support these colors. There is so much blocking you. You don't know if users TV will support them. So mostly for now, I would say most games HDR is about added brightness, and it also fixes bending, like bit depth. I'm not gonna get too much into it, but if you look at the sky or a dark room in older games, sometimes you can see like the gradient suddenly shift between like gray and black, like, and you can see a line, a distinct line that breaks between them. This happens in movies, like on YouTube. You often see that because the encoding is not so good, and on Netflix
Like,
as well.
could it be described as noise as well, or that's something different?
No, actually,
Not
noise
really, no.
fixes that. Not one of the
Ah,
reasons why creators add film grain to their games is because it hides this defect.
oh, interesting. Okay, that's cool.
But
Oh,
in HDR, you don't get um, as much bending because you have more room. You can say have this gray to be this bright. In SDR you have some steps like gray here and a brighter gray and a brighter gray and a brighter gray. In HDR you have all the steps in between.
the whole gradient.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. Interesting. To follow up with this question, what exactly motivated you or directed your focus, at least currently, towards HDR? Because I understand that early on you were doing VR and other stuff, which we might get into a little later. So, what exactly motivated you to kind of concentrate on HDR?
I've always just kind of liked new technologies and stuff. I was pretty passionate about like HD TVs when they came out, like 180p, 720p with the PS3, Xbox 360. I begged my mom to buy me like I think we already had I had an OLED or some early version of that, like
Whoa, seriously,
many
back in the
many
day.
years ago. Yeah,
Oh,
it
wow.
was not games were not playable on it because the input lag was like literally half a second or something.
Oh, my God.
You
Okay.
could make a coffee in the time the game responded to your inputs. Um, so I've never used it. But anyway, I just bought like a new monitor a couple years ago, which is called the Samsung Odyssey G9, which is a
Yeah,
wider
the
monitor,
big
ultra
boy.
wide.
The big
It's
boy.
basically two normal monitors next to each other, and that helps so much even for work. Even now, I'm using like um, my notes on one side and the video on the other, and it's so cool. And you don't have
Yeah,
a
it's sweet.
split in between, So for games, it's super immersive. But anyway, this monitor also supports HDR, and then I bought an OLED TV, and I realized how amazing HDR was in games, like to the point where I'm sad to say it's getting harder to play games that don't have it.
I
Maybe I'm a
see.
bit annoying on that front, but um, I started playing Control, and I was a bit let down by the fact that he had all these technologies like DLSS, ray tracing. It supported any refresh rate. It ran at 140 frames per second and has everything you could ask for a game technically, and also artistically. It looks insanely good,
Yeah, absolutely.
but it
Definitely.
was it was not HDR, and so I guess my actual like developer interest started there. But yeah, basically I just bought an OLED and I was just blown away. That's about it. That-
That's a wonderful story, and you just decided to kind of, you know what, let's uh, let's get into this sphere of work.
yes, I have kind of, in a way, my secret intent is to make it more popular. Uh, I want to push people to know what it is and enjoy it. I think the adoption rate is not being that quick right now. Like all the new TVs, I mean, a decent amount of TVs that are being sold now have HDR, I don't know what would be the percentage of people that have it in their homes. Many games still don't have it. Um,
Even current titles, current.
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
If
okay.
unless they are like AAA, it's very likely they will not support HDR at all. And it's not that easy to implement. You need to like change your whole rendering engine. But yeah, it's just not going as quick as I would have hoped.
But I kind of noticed actually, paying attention to games and how games are developed currently, that many devs don't put too much effort or care into kind of implementing HDR into their games. And I agree with what you're saying that perhaps the implementation rate is not going as fast as it should. And there seems to probably be a confusion on like the SDR, gamma, and all that as well. Why do you think that is? And how do you personally overcome those mistakes?
Yeah, big topic. So
Yeah,
mm,
we're gonna get into that.
I think one of the first things I can say about this is that developing in HDR is kind of a new mindset, even artistically speaking. Um, Based on what I said before, just imagine you had a limited amount of brightness range that you could use, and now suddenly you can use any range. And so there is possibly a lot of artists and even rendering programmers that are still very used to the concept that games will not be able to output the sun being that bright. And so they build, and like they have worked for 20 years like that or more, and so these concepts are deeply ingrained in them. Like I have the luck to come from a fresh perspective. I didn't really work on anything that was graphic related before, so I had a fresh start. I didn't have these this concept baked in my head, but basically I think it's kind of hard to shift your whole mindset to this new range. I mean, it sounds stupid, but you need to think about stuff a little bit different, especially when it comes to like color grading and manipulating the image that ultimately the user sees. Like the game rendering happens in the same way, but then adjusting colors and making the image presentable to the screen, that's what changes. And like what looked good in SDR is not what looks good in HDR. Like
Hmm.
there is a bit of a deviation, um, and that's what I think makes it harder for devs to realize. Like we didn't really have OLED TVs up until 5 years ago. I don't think they were that common. And so, for example, there's a lot of games that have elevated black level, raised blacks. So even if you go into a room that is completely dark, your screen is gonna be gray. It's gonna have a
Yeah,
little bit of darkness,
I know
and
what you're saying.
sometimes it's fine. But the thing is, sometimes game devs wouldn't even realize because the LCD panels that they developed to didn't have enough bandwidth, let's say, to
Interesting.
showcase the
Okay.
difference between that and pitch black. You wouldn't notice a difference. And
Oh
so
my
let's
God.
say
Okay.
by mistake, sometimes this could have happened in like older games and still happens now. I mean, of course, making a game, it's like ex- a huge achievement, especially bigger games. But so there is a lot that could influence this, and often it's also artistic intent. So no problem with that. But I think a lot of times it's been like accidental.
So it's just because not intentional, accidental in a way that their screen simply differs from the screen of the player, and that's what causes the whole issue, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a
Oh,
big
crazy.
simplification, but
All
yeah,
right.
yeah, you could say that. And yeah, talking about this like elevated blacks thing, it wasn't as much of an issue in SDR as it is in HDR because like now we have better screens and you can see these defects or sometimes artistic choices. You can notice them more, and this applies further on OLED plus HDR. Like both of these things makes you notice more. So these artistic choices don't look so great in HDR, at least according to some people.
Yeah.
They looked fine in SDR, and this is what I mean when I'm saying there is a little bit of a mindset different. Like you need to change your mindset to develop in
I
HDR. You
see.
need to embrace it if you want. Not every developer needs to. But yeah, like point is, what looked good in SDR is a little bit different than what looks good in HDR. To put it in this way, HDR is opt-in. Like you don't have to use all of it, but all that it offers, but it's there for you to use. It's a lot about the artistic intent. It's
Right.
um, there's a lot of HDR passionate people that just want highlights, and I'm definitely in there as well. Like I like a lamp or the sun in games to be bright. It makes me feel more immersed, but that's not always what the vision of the game wants. This might be a little bit presumptuous of me, but I think a lot of games are still playing to the strengths of SDR. For example, Starfield is the opposite of HDR. They are using even less range. They're taking the SDR range and using like half of that. I think one of the reasons that HDR is not as popular as it could or should be is that it doesn't have like a single specific marketing behind it. Like um, ray tracing has been very much pushed by NVIDIA. You know, they
Yeah.
give money or developers like sponsored other developers to implement ray tracing in their games. Like when NVIDIA announced their first ray tracing cards, after like 1 month, Unreal Engine supported all the ray tracing stuff already.
Yeah.
Um, there hasn't been a drive like that because there is no single force behind HDR. Nobody really makes money off of it, except of course LG or Samsung. But they're not gonna pay developers to implement HDR because who guarantees them that they're gonna buy their TV? No, nobody does.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so there is no like exclusivity like DLSS. And yeah, I think that definitely plays a role. There's no like conspiracy, but you know, it's just the fact that there is no single driving force behind it. Something else that I would like to touch on and that has been of great interest to me in the last couple of years as well is the concept of gamma. I've been like kind of amazed by how big and complicated that world is and how mysterious it is. And it's really not easy to find information, even as a as a developer, to figure out what is right to do with your image. Like when you output the image from the game onto the monitor, there is something that is defined as gamma encoding, and I'm not gonna get it too much in depth there, but basically it's a way to optimize an image. Uh, like you have a limited amount of information that you can send your monitor every
Yeah.
frame. It's not unlimited, and so you have to encode that in the best way possible. That is gonna lead to the best visual result from the human eyes, and human eyes see a lot more detail in shadow than around light.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Okay. Hmm.
so if like we perceive shades of dark colors or black a lot more accurately, we see more shades of them. If you have a lamp that is 100 nits or 200 nits, there is barely any visible difference. You kind of don't even notice. But if you go from like 10 nits to 5 nits, it's still half, but you notice a massive difference.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
so
Interesting.
it's about how our eyes perceive light. That needs to be acknowledged by TVs because then they can optimize the image to put more information in the parts that our eyes give more importance to. And that is what gamma ultimately is. It's to give more detail to the shadow areas compared to the bright areas. While studying this stuff and trying to do it right for anything I worked on, I have discovered that it's such a big and underappreciated world. And I had some other mentors here, not just the ones that I mentioned before. Like
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
been like on Discord chatting with, like hardware manufacturers, colorist people, filmmakers, and game makers, or just passionate people that just love it to do that in their free time. And this mostly also stemmed from my research for my control mod. For an image to be displayed correctly, um, the game needs to output it with a specific gamma, and gamma is like a value. You can pick a stronger gamma, which puts even more detail in the shadow, or a weaker gamma that puts a little bit more detail into the highlights. What's important is that the TV or monitor needs to use the exact same value as the game.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not gonna normalize each other out, and you're gonna have like an unbalanced image. What I have found out is that many games use the wrong formula, and it doesn't align with what screens expect. Uh, I'm just gonna
Oh
say the
God.
names. There is basically two ways of doing gamma. There is gamma 2.2 and gamma sRGB, and they're slightly different. Um, but if you use the wrong one, you will have raised blacks, and it's pretty noticeable, or crushed blacks. You will lose detail in blacks. It's pretty noticeable, and it's not, you don't want that. Movies, to my knowledge, generally use gamma 2.4, and games target gamma 2.2, but developers often use the gamma sRGB formula, and they have a little bit of a different in how the shadow is displayed. And again, if you don't use the same formula between the game and the TV, then yeah, you're gonna have a mismatch, either crushed or raised shadow. And that doesn't really matter if the whole game was calibrated with the mismatch baked in. Like if the
Got
developers
it.
had the wrong screens all along and it didn't match the game, they still like developed the game with that mistake. It's built into the look. So correcting that mistake makes it look worse, even if it's
Okay.
technically correct. Like
Hmm.
if you fix the gamma formula and you make a match between the game and the monitor, you can say nice, now it's correct, but in reality you actually ruin the look,
Oh, interesting.
because
Okay.
again that error was built into the levels, the game look. Like if they had, developers can do anything they want. They can make lights dimmer, they can change the texture colors. I have found out that in many SDR games, there is this mismatch that is baked into the game. And what's happening now is that like Windows on PC is defaulting to HDR for new monitors, and TVs also, like Xbox upgrades all the SDR signals to HDR, and the same PS5. But basically, I have found out that PS5 does it correctly, and Xbox does it incorrectly. So if you play
Seriously.
older games, like a PS4 game or an Xbox One game on the newer consoles on HDR, they will be upgraded to HDR differently. And Sony, which is, to my opinion, a little bit more knowledgeable on this stuff, uses Gamma 2.2, which matches what TVs used. And so you upgrade to HDR correctly, by using the same formula that the TVs would have used in SDR. I know this is a bit complicated, but
No, no, it's interesting.
Microsoft, yeah, Microsoft uses sRGB to upgrade SDR to HDR. So when you play SDR games on HDR, either on Windows or Xbox, they will have raised blacks, and that's something that the HDR community has been like complaining about. Too bad there's only like 20 of us, so nobody hears, but it's been a pretty relevant problem. And that's also been a bit of an obstacle when like working with code bases, because you have to acknowledge all these little hardware errors that were built into the pipeline and kind of port that into the HDR look. Uh, because again, like technically it was wrong. Like the game was using the a wrong signal encoding, but that's how the game was supposed to look. So even if it was technically wrong, and now it looked fine. Even if it was technically wrong, it looked fine. But now we have Xbox that is upgrading it using the
Yeah,
technically right way, but it
yeah.
makes it look worse. It makes it look
Oh
worse.
my.
It seems to me that Microsoft is actually, there's a bit of a funny thing, like sRGB, the formula, the gamma standard that many games use, is actually invented by Microsoft. It's a standard that Microsoft defined. And in my research, there is very little monitors that actually use it. But Microsoft keeps insisting that that's the standard because they invented that standard. But hardware manufacturers never followed it. Uh, so all screens use Gamma 2.2. Some monitors do have an sRGB mode, but it never really seems to be accurate. It seems like it's just better to use Gamma 2.2. But it's funny because just Microsoft doesn't seem to want to let go and surrender to the fact that it's never been a thing. Like,
Oh my, that's crazy.
yeah,
I hadn't even the slightest clue, but that's quite a big deal, and a bit funny in a way, actually.
yeah, yeah. It's funny because yeah, they just don't let go. Like, dude, like nobody ever used this formula. Just forget about it. It's not
We need
real.
to get Microsoft to listen. We need to get Microsoft to listen to this episode urgently. So I'd like to shift the focus a little bit and talk about some of the personal projects that you have done over on Dolphin. But kind of before we, fully jump in, could you please first of all kind of give a description of what the Dolphin EMU exactly is for those who might not know, and why exactly is it significant, and then continue to talk about the two projects that you have, or one of the two projects that you have done there, which is the color correction one and the output resampling one, and what exactly was the goal for both of them.
Yeah. To make it brief, Dolphin is an emulator, and an emulator is a piece of software that, let's say, runs on like a PC, a computer, like on Windows, and allows you to play games that were meant for a different hardware. So PS2 or Wii or GameCube or PS3 or whatever you want. There is an emulator for most of these older consoles. Dolphin is one of the oldest emulators. It's been around like since 2002 or something. Of course, developers have changed through time. It's open source. They do have to be very careful with, Nintendo. Nintendo doesn't like emulation. They claim that it makes them lose sales. But that's another discussion, like game
Yeah, yeah,
preservation and stuff. Specifically, for me, I have actually been working on four things on Dolphin, and this is mostly just me playing older games or cult classics that I never played before, and then I get into it and I notice that something isn't as great as I would have hoped. And
right.
about 3 years ago, I've been improving like the input system of the emulator. and reworking how it renders audio, because these older consoles had hardware chips to like synthesize audio. They had like synthesizers. In modern games, I think every game does it themselves in their own software, but in older games you had a hardware, and you would say like make a sound wave that has this frequency and this pitch and lasts this much. You wouldn't just have mp3 files and play them, it was, they were generated on the spot. So the the emulator needs to replicate this. Been working on that. I haven't finished yet. Like I'm planning to go back. It's I've improved a little bit of that, how it sounds to the final user. It was
Hmm.
crackling sometimes. There was a little bit of
So,
distortion.
what game exactly are we talking about?
Um, well, these improvements apply to any game that you can play under Dolphin.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
this stuff is not game specific.
Interesting. Okay.
It's the emulation layer that applies to all games, because the emulator is simulating the hardware, so it's pretending
Ah, okay.
to be a Wii. It's not
Yeah,
a per game solution.
got it. So if there was a certain problem in whilst playing the original console, here you could emulate it in a way where when the person plays it, your changes or your mods could totally get rid of that certain problem or whatever it was while
Yeah,
playing the game on the emulator.
yeah,
Oh,
you
that's
you
cool.
could say that. The last two things I've worked on, um, they are kind of tackling what you mentioned. GameCube games were developed on, I think for the most part, on like CRT televisions, or early flat screens, or rare projection television. I'm not sure about the name now, but what's important is that they used a different color space, same stuff we discussed earlier. It was still
Yeah.
SDR, but they didn't use the Rec 709, which is the modern standard. Every every country, every continent, every part of the world had their own color standards. And mainly there were three. There was one in Europe, one in USA, and one in Japan. But then
Am I
if you
correct in
look,
understanding it's NTSC PAL, right? Is this
that's
or it's different?
kind of, but it's not necessarily the same. Every country had their own standard for TVs, and like when civilization wasn't a thing yet, before the internet.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not like Japan would call USA and they would make the same standard. They would just
Yeah, of
they
doing
would
it for
record with their
themselves.
own cameras and have their own standard, and then that's why, like, I don't know, like Star Wars lasts 5 minutes longer in Europe or something, because it plays a little bit quicker, because it's like
Ah.
25 instead of 24 FPS or something like that.
Oh, that's
um
cool. Okay, I didn't know that.
it's This stuff is similar for games. Like, it's also a struggle for movies. What I'm trying to say is that the way you saw Zelda or Super Mario in 2002 in your on your TV, on in your house, on a GameCube, is different from how it appears on a modern screen, because the color space is different. So even if you said, if the game asks for pure red 100 or 255 to 00 on RGB, it would look different on a modern screen compared to one from the era. And this has not really been acknowledged by emulators. It's not a massive change. It's not like it changes completely the look. I wanted to explore this, and there were a few people that did something like that, but there was no single solution for Dolphin. And so I was helped by Lilium, another collaborator of mine. We went on to investigate like Japanese TV standards from the 90s, and wrote down all the color space details and math, and basically
Really? Oh, wow.
convert the game to try to look like that. Like, we convert the colors to how they would have looked on Japanese TVs or European TVs or USA TVs. And what's kind of weird is that we don't even know what TV the game was developed on. A kid
Originally,
from,
right?
yeah, like a kid from USA and a kid from Europe would see greens, the green shades in games a little bit different, or red. Like the red was slightly different on their TVs, so games still look a little bit different. And we
Oh
have no
wow.
way of knowing what screens Japanese games were developed on, but we assume they were made on Japanese TVs, and so we replicate. You can now replicate that look on Dolphin.
So if I wish, I could emulate the game in whatever not style, but in whatever TV I wanted. So I could play it on the US TV, on the European or Japanese, and see personally for myself the differences. And wow, that's
Yeah,
insane. And one day you're gonna have to probably get a collection of all these CRT TVs for yourself. And
I want to make clear that the feature that I added does not emulate the defects of CRT TVs. You know, they had scan
the
lines,
lines,
and
exactly.
you know the image was frying a little bit, and all that
Yeah.
stuff. We do not apply these defects because that's not what I'm looking for. I was looking for color accuracy, so I took the best features of CRTs, but not the defects. And there was a little bit of a philosophy debate on this. Like, what do we want to do? Do we want to emulate the whole CRT experience or just the accuracy of the colors? And my intent was to have it accurate.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would agree with you. Probably to emulate like the defects, in my opinion, probably would take away from the authentic experience because all CRT difference come different, you know, and to emulate each and every type of defect that is so unique with, I don't know, in my mind, probably would be difficult to say the least.
it is definitely difficult, but in my opinion, it just ruins the look of the game because like it's for the nostalgia. It adds into the nostalgia factor, but it kind of defeats the point of emulation because when emulating, I like to increase the quality of the game. Then we can jump into the other project that I did, which is output resampling. Like Wii and GameCube were not HD consoles, so they rendered at about 540p, which is like
Hmm.
the early YouTube resolutions.
Yeah, yeah, not so good.
Yeah, not so great. And Dolphin, of course, allows you to increase this resolution. But this is another CRT things, and I'm just gonna mention it because it's too complicated. But pixels back then were not square like they are. If you look closely on an LCD now, every pixel is square. But on a CRT, they would be more wide than tall.
Oh, so
Um,
like rectangular, more rectangular.
yeah, they would be
Oh,
rectangular.
okay.
And this is another hugely complicated thing that the
Oh my
emulator needs
God.
to deal with because you need to adapt that image onto newer screen. That was also the beginning of 16 by 9 TVs, like widescreen, because in like 2001 you didn't have any, or at least many, I'm not sure, but games supported both 4 by 3 and 16 by 9. To make it short, like yeah, Dolphin supports an increased resolution boost for games, and they look a lot more crisp. You can see details that you could have never have seen on playing on an old CRT at lower resolution. The problem was, yeah, that the pixels were not square, so we need to adapt the image to monitors that have square pixels, and that requires what is called resampling, which is adapting a sample like an image onto another one. Yeah, like my intent was to make it look more detailed and crisp, because there was a little bit of a quality loss in case your monitor was not a direct multiplier of the original resolution. Like if you
My
have,
God.
yeah, exactly.
The problems. Oh, it's crazy.
So we wrote some math algorithms to analyze the pixels and blend them together so the output would look as crisp as possible. I was not completely alone in this. I was helped by, like, I think math university student or something that was really into like low level math stuff, let's say,
Right,
and
right.
that has some great ideas that then then we applied.
So I would like to talk a little bit more about your passion for HDR and modding HDR into AAA titles. So obviously you work at Remedy, and there's quite an interesting, well, actually a great story about you joining Remedy and then taking on a personal project to create an HDR mod for a certain game that ended up being quite highly praised by the community. A few websites wrote about it, and there's even a whole like detailed video on your mod by Digital Foundry, which I definitely advise people to go and check out. But since I have you here right in front of me, could you take me through that whole story and how you decided to take that project onto your own hands?
I was a bit sad that Control didn't have HDR when playing it, and I had not played it yet when I joined Remedy. I was waiting for, having a few weeks off where I could relax and enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
And then I was gradually getting more and more into HDR and seeing how beautiful HDR games were. And Control had all these amazing like red lights, purple, like all these strong colors, a very strong use of shadow and light, and a stunning visual presentation in general. And so I thought it really lended itself to HDR. And then of course I had access to it, so I
Yeah, yeah,
could
yeah.
do it. Like if I had to take that from the point of view of somebody external from Remedy, I definitely couldn't have done it. Some people could have, like you, but you need to reverse engineer everything. Like I could see how it worked directly without needing to reverse engineer everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And I got COVID and I wasn't feeling too bad, so I started this side project. And at first, I think I got it running in a couple weeks. And to be clear, that was the first time I ever worked with graphics. One of the reasons for which I did this is to learn about graphics and shaders and all that stuff. But yeah, I started and I got it to look all right within a couple of weeks. And then, like, I mean, I had endless calls with Tommaso about HDR and stuff. He was
Yeah.
also quite into it, and this is where I was figuring out all the stuff that I talked in the rest of the interview, like being like, oh, so this was that all along. So we've been doing it wrong for like weeks. It was a train ride, like a ride like that. But yeah, I got it running within a couple weeks, and then kept finding problems that at first I was like, who cares? I'm not gonna fix that. But then I would play more, and I would be like, that's actually pretty lame. And
Yeah.
then I don't know, after 2 or 3 months, I released it as a test. Again, I had some super amazing people like help me all the times on testing it. I had some very adept, dedicated testers to help me all the times. They were passionate about the game and HDR. They would try it and find bugs and issues, or this doesn't look
Right.
that great, and they would give me opinions. And I think it's been going on for 6 months. I was working on it in my free time after work. Not every day. Sometimes I would stop for weeks and stuff. But so this is kind of the story. And
That's wonderful.
ever since, I've been pretty happy with the results. Like of
Yeah.
technically, like when I actually ended up playing the game with the HDR mod, I was like, wow, the game is like 10 hours long, but in a way, it was worth spending, I don't know, 500 hours doing the mod just to get like that impressive visual presentation. I get really stunned when I see like good HDR stuff. I really am like, like
Yeah,
like
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. In awe.
yeah.
Definitely. And just can I say, from behalf of the community, a big thank you, because I've checked some information about this mod, and it's great. I've looked at it. It's fantastic. People love it. So yeah, on the behalf of the community, thank you for taking the time while you were sick with COVID to actually take this project. And to kind of steer things in a bit of a different direction, where there's, as we mentioned previously in our conversation, I'd like to speak about one of the latest projects that you're doing, which is the Native HDR mod for Starfield. Very relatable projects, right? AAA titles that you're working on, and I wouldn't say fixing them up, but just adding that HDR functionality. So could you just explain why did you decide to tackle that specific project, and exactly how are you doing it, and how long is it taking you?
So the Starfield mod that we have is called Luma, and it's not just me, it's me and 4 other developers, pretty much everybody equally involved, but we have very different roles and a very different skill set. I couldn't do it alone. I don't remember exactly how it started. Like the game came out and people were like, "Oh my God, this game is like the opposite of HDR." It, it didn't have
Right.
HDR, but even in SDR, it was it didn't have much contrast in the picture. And so yeah, it just gradually started from there. Like I knew some modders that worked on stuff like this before, and I think I just made a group chat with some people that might be interested, and and it rolled on from there. I couldn't even have started without them because first of all, it required a lot of reverse engineering. Like we are hooking into the game, rendering code, and like replacing how that works with our own version. And I don't have that in my skill set. I barely and I don't want to learn because I don't have time for that. So uh,
Yeah.
we had some super amazing people taking care of that. Urge, for example. Once we had that running, then basically I had probably the same development environment they would have at Bethesda. Like I could change the game look on the spot, write some code, click enter, and it would apply it immediately in on the game.
Wow.
So I had
It's
like a
crazy.
seamless. Yeah, we're gonna release the source code soon, so anybody could hop in and improve it. Yeah, to explain a little bit a little bit what's behind it, and why we decided to tackle that specific game. Um, First of all, Starfield is built on the same engine as Skyrim and all the Bethesda games, and they are known to be fairly moddable. Their engine is built in a way that allows people to hook in and change stuff, and so that was one of the reasons. But also there is the fact that the game didn't support HDR, and there is the fact that the look it was going for was basically the opposite of HDR. So in SDR, you have this range where this is pitch black and this is full white. Starfield, pretty much in most circumstances, was using a compressed range.
Oh
So you would
wow,
have no
interesting.
real blacks and you would have no real highlights. It was kind of low dynamic range.
Do you think that was intentional?
Yeah, that was definitely intentional.
That
And
was intentional. Okay.
I cannot say that looks bad because an artistic intent is an artistic intent, but I can say that a lot of the community wasn't too happy about it, and also it doesn't suit everyone's taste. There's a lot of people that just don't want to play like that, and worst of all, it looks really bad on OLED in my opinion because it doesn't take advantage of the blacks that you can get. To its advantage, I can say that the game does convey a feeling of like I don't know being shot with a camera from the 60s or something.
Yeah.
It goes for this specific look. Yeah, I don't agree with it like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
I
There's
can't say
some
it's
who like
bad.
it, some who don't.
Yeah. What I can say is that it kind of goes against the trend of modern TVs because it's not playing to the strengths of them at all. People started immediately after one day of release. They started fixing this thing up. They have every scene of the game uses a color correction table, so every color is mapped to another one. People started modifying these values so that the game would have a little bit more contrast. And then on top of that, we implemented HDR. We recruited one of the modders behind this the early mods that fix the colors in SDR. He's been like a super valuable member of the team, and he's still developing stuff even right now, probably for the
You want
mod.
to shout him out?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, we have for the mod we have short fuse, Lilium and Ursh,
Cool.
and
Well, huge thank you to all of you guys for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, they
Definitely. So basically, you give the people the choice. If you want to play the game the way it's intended, you can play it that way. If you feel like you want a bit more color, you can download this mod and check it out that way. My question: can people download it now currently? Right?
yeah. It's
Where
on
can we do that?
Nexus mods. You
Okay.
can link it here. It works on PC, on PC only, of course. It's not an Xbox. And the most important thing is that it really allows you to tweak the look to your own liking. So you can keep that original artistic intent that compresses the range, but unlocks it a little bit to allow some HDR highlights, or you can completely get rid of that and get a full HDR experience. We have aimed at not changing the game's look too much. We don't want to go like towards this is what we would like artistically. We are just unlocking the HDR range and but keeping the look as it was as much as we can.
That's awesome, man. That's really really awesome. So definitely check out the mod if you're at all interested. We're gonna have it linked down below. I'm gonna check it out a little bit later because my setup is not here yet. I need to get my setup all set up. So once that's done, I'll definitely take a look. But I'm very interested. I'm very interested to see the difference between the original way and with your tweaks. So to continue with our conversation here, and basically to continue with the whole theme of your experience in HDR implementation and modding, and basically doing everything good for the community. What are some of the lessons basically that you have learned that make HDR implementation specifically for your current projects better and easier? Some tips and tricks that probably you learned along your way that others could use, and that we could all just listen to and see your progress.
To this point, it's my answer would tend to be more technical than anything. So first of all, I would say we recently made a new Discord server called HDR Den, and you can
Hmm.
link it here. And if there is any
Absolutely.
developer that is interested in HDR implementations, you can reach. Like we have tried to gather a lot of HDR developers there, and we discuss like this kind of stuff for the projects that we make. So if you're interested, you can join that and talk to developers. It's fairly important to have it as early on in the development of a project because it changes how you make the levels, like the light intensity values of the sun, every lamp in the game. Something I have noticed when upgrading Control and Starfield to HDR is that some lights kind of make no sense. You might have a light bulb in one room that is like 3 times brighter than the sun, and in the room next to it, it's like super dim. And
Right.
you know what? In SDR, you don't see a difference because the
Mm.
brightness range pretty much makes them look identical because you compress the original brightness to like there would be a tiny difference, but you wouldn't notice that there was an issue. Once you unlock the range, then you play the game, you go into the first room and you're like, why is this light so bright? And then you go into the other room and you're like, why is this light so dim? And this is why it's important to have it early on as possible because you need to build the world in a way that is consistent for HDR. In a way, it needs to replicate real life more. So you would want lights to have real life values for their strength.
Okay, well, that does make sense to have it early on, because instead of kind of going in and one by one correcting all the potential things that could be mismatched, here you kind of have it from the get go, right? And
Yeah,
it kind of all flows seamlessly, and the workflow kind of probably, yeah, I would
yeah,
imagine it's super
You
super
build it
simple from them.
naturally instead of
Yeah,
patching it up at the end and then realizing that so many lights don't look great in HDR, and then you would have to go back and do it all, and there's probably no time, and then the game is shipping or something like that, you know. And I've
right.
seen that happen in games. Another thing that many games HDR implementation don't get right or perfect is the HDR calibration menu. Every HDR display is different, has a different set of capabilities, specifically when it comes to the peak brightness. It might be 400 nits or 2000 nits, and the game needs to acknowledge that. So you do need often calibration menu so that users can tell the game how bright their monitor can go, and also give them a choice on how bright they want the game in general. If you're playing from a dark room, the experience is very different compared to a bright room. But this has been kind of hard to implement for devs that maybe use Unreal Engine, so they have limited possibilities on there. But I think it's one of the most important factors in an HDR implementation. If you have a good calibration menu, then you give the user more tools to play the game as they would like it, while still, retaining the artistic intent. It's just about changing brightness.
I would like to kind of talk about the workflow at work, right? So, how do you work with other members of the team, of the development team, for example, like level designers or even artists, to ensure that the HDR implementation kind of complements the overall visual style and the storytelling of the game, so it kind of all works cohesively and seamlessly together?
I think that's in general something that will be taken care of by artists on a game, and like art people, like the whole art division of the game. But of course, like I would represent the technical side of development more than artistic one. um, but of course there needs to be communication. Like the art part of the game needs to know what the game technology can do, and how can lights be bright, how bright they can be, like can they even be bright, and all this kind of stuff. And that's different for every game. Like
Hmm.
Unreal Engine works in a way, Unity works in a way, the Remedy engine works in another way. Any engine works differently on this front. So there definitely needs to be communication as early as possible between departments. But on how HDR can complement storytelling, I think, let's say most of the game is like dim, and then you have a couple selected scenes which have very strong highlights and which are carefully distributed
Hmm.
so that you really get a stunning impression and maybe remember that moment. And games can do the same, or they can use highlights all the times. It's really this is it's really more of a matter for art. I have my own opinions, of course. You can definitely use HDR to give a bit of a more memorable moment in some scenes, and
Yeah, that's very
especially
interesting.
the use of lights, like Control, for example, has so many lights, like strobing lights that move around the scene, and they cast shadow. And that kind of stuff is really enhanced in HDR because you have more colors and more brightness, and it can really make you in like, whoa.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's a night
definitely
and day
that.
difference. Yeah,
Yeah.
for some, for sure. So my next question that I'm kind of curious to ask you is, what, in your opinion, makes a good PC game port, and what are kind of the common pitfalls when it comes to that? What things do you usually want to mod exactly, and generally, since you are an advocate of ultra wide monitors, how does that whole aspect work for ultra wide monitors as well?
There is a great video from Digital Foundry about this stuff, about like what makes a PC port good, then what are the common pitfalls. So um, I think we can link to that for the most part, but I would like to add my own things, and what usually as a modder drives me to make mods for specific games. For example, there is a Unreal Engine. It's like the engine used by most games that are not AAA or even AAA, but many indie devs use it, and it supports HDR natively. with a toggle button. Like you can just click enable HDR in the engine and it will work and it will look pretty amazing. But developers either don't know or don't care about this. And so one of the things that I usually do when playing a Steam game that I bought from an indie dev is I go into the settings, the config of Unreal, and I enable HDR. I enjoy games that didn't have HDR officially. I enable it locally, and there is a little community we have about HDR, and we all do this kind of modding. Like we force Unreal Engine games to be HDR, and I'm so grateful that's possible because they look way better that way. But at the same time, it's a little bit sad that developers didn't even take the time to expose a flag, a setting from the engine into their menu. And I can force it on myself. So it's weird that they didn't. It's understandable because it's indie games most of the times, but there's some bigger AAA games that do this as well. Another issue that as a niche PC gamer I often encounter is games that don't support ultra wide screen. So anything wider than 16 by 9, 21 by 9, a wider aspect ratio. Um, Many games don't scale correctly. So instead of like increasing what you would see on the sides, they compress what you see top down. And so you
Ah,
get a
okay.
really narrow view, like the field of view is really narrow and you can't really enjoy the game that way. And again, it's like a single flag in Unreal to fix it, but developers often don't even take the time to fix that. Just like for HDR, there is a community for ultra wide modders that has a patch ready on day one for most games. People like Rose, an ultra wide modder that keep the community alive despite developers not supporting it. And yeah, these kind of things saddens me a little bit because I think games should focus more on being future proof. Like I don't know,
Right. Yeah.
supporting 8K resolution because we are moving there. Like all TVs will be HDR, and I think at some point TVs will be wider. And if developers don't put a little bit of effort into supporting these things now and making their game more, adaptive to whatever hardware you play it on, and then in 10 years, 20 years, it's going to be a struggle to play these games. And you're going to need like an emulator like Dolphin or something to
Exactly.
fix up all these
Exactly.
issues.
And people like you
Uh,
to help everybody.
yeah, but what I'm saying is it would just be nice if developers took a little bit more care on that. But of course, they have limited time as well, so I can't ask for everything.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I definitely wish that they will do. It's a bittersweet thing. I wish they do, but I also not because it's a cool thing to have these emulators and projects like what you're doing. I mean, I've taken a look and I really enjoy what you're doing, and I understand. I'm not a programmer, but I understand the depths you have to go to get these projects done, and it's something just for the community. That you're doing here. Filippo, please tell me, this is a recurring question on the podcast. Define what is a video game for you.
I think like the kind of games that I play are more like action focused and story oriented. And of course, these are just the games I like. But for example, mobile games that I don't really like to play in general. They're generally not targeted to me. But when there is so much psychology behind the design of a game that is built to make money, sometimes it can still be a great game, but when the whole design of the game was driven uh, for revenue, that's I think where it starts to be something else than just a video
I
game.
fully, I agree. I agree. I agree.
And I think we can see this a little bit in Ubisoft games and a lot. I mean, all the games now. Um, but like Ubisoft
Microtransactions and
games, I'm
whatnot.
not gonna say they're not art. They are amazing in their own way. But I'm not the biggest lover of this aspect of games like Far Cry using the same formula. and Assassin's Creed, all the Ubisoft games using the same similar formula that they know works and also helps selling microtransactions and that kind of stuff. So that specific aspect of games, I don't really like much.
Yeah,
And
I can agree with you on that for sure. It's something that is a bit annoying. So what you're saying is that you prefer when a gaming experience is like a full-on game from start to finish. Just from the top of my head, Elden Ring, right? You
yeah,
get it. It's a whole crazy experience, humongous game. You know, nothing extra, nothing out of the blue. You know, just here, take it and enjoy it, right?
yeah, or even Remedy's games are very
Yeah,
art
for sure.
driven, like that kind of stuff. But these are just my personal favorites. But
Got
yes,
it.
if I had to pick like the games with the best HDR implementation, I would definitely say the Dead Space remake from 2023. The fact that there is so much contrast between shadow, most of the game is in the darkness, and bright light really create such a strong and unique atmosphere for that game. I was really mind blown. Red Dead Redemption 2 also has incredible HDR in my opinion. In general, it's mostly because the lighting and the game is so beautiful in the first place, but you have such strong highlights and stuff that makes it look amazing. Resident Evil games generally have good HDR. I would say Control. My Control mod, I think, is pretty good on HDR range and that kind of stuff. Of course, I haven't played all games. I heard good things about Cyberpunk as well, and some Sony first-party titles like Spider-Man and Horizon. To be clear, I am not really a rendering or graphics programmer. I've been doing gameplay and VR and whatever Dolphin and C++ stuff, but I'm pretty much a noob compared to, real graphics programmer that I might have met at Remedy or online. Like I don't know much of anything, if not some details about HDR, which is of course useful knowledge and very specific knowledge it seems, because the situation on HDR, like the documentation you can find around is still very confusing and nobody will tell you how to do things. You have to figure out everything your own or have some kind of mentor, which is kind of what I had. I found some people that shared a lot of insight with me that I couldn't have found otherwise. There is no guide. Even documentation by Microsoft or Sony is very lackluster. It's not great. My dream, I mean, I'm working at Remedy full time and I'm happy with that. But I'm kind of dreaming in another life to be kind of a freelance HDR implementer. There's a lot of engines around the world for companies that make games that they have their own engines and it doesn't support HDR yet. And I would love to implement HDR on them as a freelance or whatever, why not for free, even for free as a mod. But if you have the source code, it's a lot easier, of course. Another kind of dream of mine that I've been discussing with the other Starfield modders is to make a patron Patreon to make a Patreon account where we ask people for donations or support and we make HDR mods for old games. For example, we have been discussing what games would benefit from HDR the most between the old ones, and I think there's two or three games that most people tend to go to, and they are GTA 4, which is stunning already, and there's a lot of mods, but doesn't have HDR because it's super old. Dead Space 1, but we have Dead Space 2, and Batman Arkham Knight would absolutely benefit from that.
Filippo, you know, an interesting thing that I would like to kind of start perhaps with you is for you to leave a question for the future guest of the show. So, if I may ask you, could you please give me a question that I could ask my future guest by you?
The question I have would be like,
So, with all that said, Filippo, I would like to say a humongous thank you for being a guest on the show. It was an honor to speak with you. It was quite a technical conversation sometimes, and I tried to catch up with you, but nonetheless, a very, very insightful one. And I'm pretty sure it was not only insightful for me, but also for anyone else listening. So once again, thank you very much. It was an honor, and hope to see you probably soon again on another guest appearance.
Thank you as well for having me on my probably first interview or whatever you want to call it.
We got it.
Conversation. Thanks.